This year's crypto presence at Davos is fairly muted compared to previous years, but making a big showing along the promenade of promotional houses is enterprise blockchain. Enter Mrinal Manohar, CEO and co-founder of Casper Labs, as well as Nilmini Rubin, Chief of Staff and Head of Global Policy at Hedera. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
So we are looking at a more muted crypto presence compared to previous years. So what is your experience so far in your conversations at what? Nilmini, let's start with you.
We've had a really wonderful reception here. People are curious still about blockchain and crypto, and they are coming in asking about use cases and how can it really help change the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been a good bifurcation, actually, that's happened. I think people have realized that cryptocurrency and blockchain technology are actually different things. You know, enterprises are realizing that blockchain is incredibly powerful technology. I mean, when you have a large, varied, unrelated set of diverse validators, you get a level of copy protection and a level of digital certification that you can't get with any other technology. Now, one of the prime use cases of that has been cryptocurrency itself, but it can be applied to so many more things. Like, for example, 2 days ago, we just announced the largest enterprise-grade application ever done on blockchain. 25 million NFTs, which represent patents, were minted. And we've actually seen the reception because of that bifurcation. People are really, really interested in the enterprise and actual usage of the underlying blockchain technology, are actually pretty hyped. If you come by the Blockchain Hub, it's usually pretty popping. But yes, there's the crypto side of it, as you've seen, especially with the pricing you mentioned, might be a little muted, but I think that's not really the end goal of the industry, regardless.
Are you finding more of a chilling effect on cryptocurrencies and movement toward enterprise blockchains or blockchains in general? Enterprise
blockchains are just like every other. So it depends. There are different modalities, right, in how people do it. But the way we do it, there's no difference. But we view the cryptocurrency, at least with ours, is not even a cryptocurrency. It's AWS credits. So think about, hey, when you go to AWS, you spend a certain amount of money to get a certain amount of processing done. It's exactly the same way on our system. So yes, technically, I wouldn't even call that a cryptocurrency. It's a utility token that is used only to drive processing power. Enterprise blockchain doesn't necessarily mean private only, and I think that's a big misconception. Every single call it installation we've done has been hybrid. Actually, we produced a report recently. You can get it off of casperlabs.io.
Hybrid, you mean like partly private versus
think about this.
Public on?
So think about even if you use AWS, right? You don't put most companies don't put 100% of their infrastructure on AWS. So Netflix, for example, when you're streaming a Netflix show, you're primarily getting it off of some cloud computing service. However, all their contracts with the actors, the shows, etc., they're not going to farm that out to servers where, especially Amazon, could potentially be a competitor, and you don't want that on their server. So it's hybrid, right? Some's on-prem, some's off-prem. Similarly, every installation we've done, there's a private blockchain that they're running, so they keep a lot of stuff on-prem. They get all the immutability from hundreds of varied validators from the public network. But this way you can stay GDPR compliant, HIPAA compliant, etc., because you kind of choose where the data flows. And this is incredibly important for enterprise because they always want to be compliant. And B, you don't know what regulation is going to look like in 2 to 3 years. So your ability to turn the dials is really important.
It's interesting you say that because apparently, from my understanding, FTX was using AWS for some of its NFT services. And when they went down, their NFT marketplace went down a bit. And so there's that concern out there of how decentralized these marketplaces truly are.
Yeah, it's a responsibility of the person who builds it to make them truly decentralized. I agree with you. I mean, I don't have enough data on that specific use case, but there's definitely lots of people who don't take advantage of the decentralization of the public network enough. I think the whole reason for hybrid networks is it really comes down to compliance. It really comes down to compliance, and it comes down to, if you think about blockchain, it is always going to be a slightly more expensive technology, because if you have to calculate something more than once and you replicate calculation on multiple computers, always more expensive. So you shouldn't be sending absolutely everything. Like if Spotify was using blockchain, it's like if you sent every single play to the blockchain, that's kind of silly. But if you had a hybrid network and you could actually use the public network to certify, for example, what number of royalties are going to Taylor Swift versus someone else, that's valuable.
I have Nilmini jump in. Hedera has a prominent presence here on the promenade at the World Economic Forum. What have some of those conversations been like? Have policymakers or have businesses had, strong criticisms or concerns about the crypto industry now that we are seeing a lot of negative headlines?
We've been getting a lot of questions about governance. And what Hedera offers is a corporate council of different members that are established companies like Google and IBM and LG that govern our network. What's interesting about the decisions that our governing council makes is they're all public. We issue our minutes of our meetings on the web. And so you have an established group that enables people to have trust in Hedera. And that comes up a lot. People, especially in the wake of FTX, they want to be able to trust the blockchain and understand where the decisions are being made to run it.
How do we build trust in the industry as it stands out? I mean, we just had a massive implosion after implosion in 2022. So how do we establish trust in 2023?
Well, in a way, it was helpful that we had an implosion because the weaker entities kind of fell down. And you have the stronger players in blockchain and crypto coming up. And I think if we continue to act legitimately and securely, that we can build trust. If we communicate clearly about what we offer, we'll build trust. If we follow up on our actions, we'll build trust. But also, if we create governance that people understand, then we build trust.
Well, Nilmini, you actually have a background in Washington politics. And so looking at the United States, regulators are very spooked by crypto right now. A lot of them took donations from FTX. They're trying to figure out how to remove themselves from those donations. And regulators are clamping down. And so heading forward, where do you see those conversations with regulators and that regulatory clarity headed?
As the blockchain community comes together, we've been working with different associations like the Blockchain Association to work with policymakers to educate them and understand their concerns and respond to them clearly, so that the proposals that come up, the regulatory proposals and the legislative proposals, actually work to support safety on crypto and blockchain rather than stifling this infant industry.
Last week, Casper also released its enterprise blockchain report, finding that nearly 90% of businesses in the US, UK, and China are starting to use blockchain in some capacity, but there's a blockchain knowledge gap. About 98% of respondents expressed that they would be more likely to adopt blockchain if they learned more about the technology and understood how their peers were using it. So how do you resolve this gap?
So there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. I wish I could give you like a contained answer. It's an education process, but I will give an analogy. It's similar to how Linux became the most widely used, server software. There was a huge education process. Open source doesn't mean unsafe. Doesn't necessarily mean it's free. There's a huge education process. But I think what really the turning point happened when Lighthouse clients existed. I think, once 2 or 3 very large Fortune 500 say, hey, look, this is how we deployed blockchain to save X amount in cost and generate X amount in revenue, then the through line is established better. Look, enterprise decision makers at the end of the day, they don't use software to be cool. And I think that's the biggest mistake this industry's made. They think, oh, if you just go in and say, hey, it's blockchain, it's cool. Enterprises care about saving cost. They care about increasing trust. Not as much as you'd think. They care about increasing revenue even more. So if you can show a way to reduce cost or increase revenue in a way that's trustworthy, those lighthouse cases need to happen. It's going to be slow and it's going to take longer than people think for those lighthouse cases to come on board. But once they come on board, I think the pace of adoption will happen way faster than people think. I don't know when that tipping point is.
We have a whole new year ahead. We'll
yeah,
see
but it's
where
going to be
goes.
steep. Yeah.
Thank you both for joining us today. That was Casper Labs CEO Mrinal, Manohar, and Hedera Chief of Staff and Head of Global Policy, Nilmini Rubin.